on sound. Patty, can you hear me all right? Okay. Nice to see everyone. This is special for us. It's our second meeting in April. We met because this was snow delayed, this meeting. We never know whether we can deliver 2 crowds in the same month, but I guess we have. Thanks for coming. I'm Mike Ehrman, President of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. What I always do at the beginning is introduce the rest of our leadership. Helen Wilson in the back is one of our vice presidents. Betty Conley over here is our other vice president. Evelyn Young in the back is our treasurer. And in the back also is Patty Hughes, our webmaster. You all look at the website, and that's Patty. And we have board members. Jim Hammond is here tonight. Toby Chapman is here tonight, and Ralph Lund is here tonight. We have 1 or 2 other board members. We're a membership organization. Audrey Glickman, manning the camera.
Cut him off.
I'm always afraid I'm going to miss someone. Thank you, Audrey, for helping me out. We are a membership organization. Been around for over 15 years. We welcome new members. And we also welcome you to these meetings without being a member, although our membership fee is all of $15, big spender, to join the group. I want to tell you just a bit about who we are, but I want to do it by telling you about what's coming up. I think that's the best way. First of all, we have these talks once a month. And on May 9th, which is only 2 weeks from now, Avi Monroe, the principal or head of the Jewish Community Day School, will be coming and talking about the history of her group. She's very excited about coming. That'll be May 9th. In June, by the way, one of the Shapiras is coming to talk about the history of Giant Eagle, one of the founding family members. So we're excited about that. So talks, you can always find us here for our talks. We also do walking tours, and we have 2 walking tours coming up, one a week from Saturday at CMU, and another one about a month later in Shenley Park. They're nominal fees. I have spots left. The sheets for those are in the back. By the way, if you're a member, you have half price compared to non-member on those walking tours. Third thing I want to tell you about briefly is you have a brochure about a new book that we have issued, or will issue, about Squirrel Hill neighborhood. How many of you have seen the Arcadia picture plus text book that we've had out for about 5 years on the history of Squirrel Hill? Okay. Betty Conley was the editor of that one, and we sold 4,000 or 5,000 copies, but the question came up, was there more to be done? And Arcadia acquired a publishing company called the Local History Press, which encourages a somewhat different kind of a book with a lot more narrative, pictures, but a lot more narrative. And we've been working the last 6 months, 8 months, is it that long or longer? Longer. Over a year to get a book ready. It's described, Helen Wilson is the editor on that one. Some of the rest of us were writers on it. The book is described on a sheet that you have here. We will not have copies of that book till after a couple of meetings from now, June 17. But anyone who wants to advance order without any money can turn one of those sheets over, put your name, phone number, and email on it, and turn it into the back desk. And after the books come, I'll be in touch with everyone, and we'll figure a purchase area where you can come and get the books. Members are membership rate for the book will be $20. The sheet says $21.95 for the price in a bookstore. It'll actually be that plus tax. For non-members, we're going to sell them for $22. So just leave the sheet in the back. We'll be doing this each of the meetings if you want to not have to think about it till the book shows up. Okay? The last thing I want to tell you about is we have owned for a number of years something called the Squirrel Hill News, an old newspaper that cover this area. 40 years, we have pieces of 30 years of that newspaper. It was in a basement for a long time. We weren't sure what to do with it. What we've done now is, it is on microfiche at the Pennsylvanian Room in Oakland, the Carnegie Library. The hard copy is available at the Heinz History Center. But the way to use it most is if we could get it searchable. So literally you could go in and you could say, I want to read something about Rosenblum's Bakery. And that engine would then search all of the newspapers and tell you what the articles were. The Pittsburgh History Pittsburgh website of the University of Pitt wants to take these papers and do that. They need to be converted, and they need to hire students to do that, and that's going to cost us $2,500. This is an opportunity for a special contribution above and beyond what you've done. It is tax deductible. We're going to raise the money for that with contributions, with some money we already have, and the books, but we'd like to get that going as soon as possible. We get lots of calls now about, do you remember the store on the corner of such and such? And we can do a little bit of a job, but when we have this newspaper, which will then be reachable through our website as well as directly through Pitt, we will have a lot more to offer. So that gives you, I think, a pretty good picture of the things we're about. Now let's move to tonight. Lauren Bairnsfather is a native of this area, White Oak, I think she said. Went away to college to study in Texas. Then graduate school at both Chicago and then Texas, and got more and more interested in Holocaust studies. She then has worked in 3 different institutions before Pittsburgh in Holocaust studies, the last one being the major memorial museum in DC, but also at the Spertus Museum in Chicago and the Morton Meyerson Family Foundation in Dallas. Then we were lucky enough that she decided to take a position with the Holocaust Center here in Pittsburgh, and now she'll tell us all about that.
As I tell it, I'm the lucky one that this position was available at exactly the moment I decided I wanted to move home to the Pittsburgh area. So I feel lucky every day to be here, and I thank you all for welcoming me tonight to speak with you about the center. Looking around the room, I recognize some people and some faces for sure. I know some of you have visited us, others have not, and I hope that you will be inspired to after I speak with you tonight. So I should still have my first slide, and I do. Okay, I'm going to wait to show you the next one, although you had a little bit of a preview I saw. So this is a very important week in Holocaust Remembrance. So I'm going to start by saying that I saw some of you Sunday at our Yom HaShoah commemoration, which was across the street in the Robinson building at the JCC. It is Yom HaShoah, which is a holiday that started in Israel in the early 1950s. It is one of 2 annual Holocaust Remembrance Days. So Yom HaShoah is particularly significant. The timing of it coincides with the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So one thing that we hear all the time when we're working with students is, why didn't the Jews fight back? So, with a little bit of historical education, we can tell them, oh, the Jews did fight back. Of course, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is an example of that. So the Holocaust Center every year has a program for Yom HaShoah, and we've been doing that since the early 1980s. And I'll tell you how I know that definitively in a minute. So this past Sunday was particularly moving, I thought, because we memorialized 4 survivors we lost in the last year. And their children and grandchildren were brave enough to come up and tell the audience, which was about 400 people, about their family members. And it was incredibly moving, and I thought they were very brave. And it was so important for the community to know about these people and about their lives. When we talk about the Holocaust, we talk about 6 million approximately Jewish victims. We use a number, we don't often enough use names. So you'll hear a little bit about Community Day School in my talk, and that will set you up for hearing from Avi Monroe next, well, it's in 2 weeks, I guess. But yesterday, so Yom HaShoah runs from evening to evening, so it started Sunday evening and it ended yesterday evening. At Community Day School, they partnered with us on a project that we're very busy with around town called the Butterfly Project, where we're working with schools and other organizations to paint ceramic butterflies to remember the children lost in the Holocaust. One butterfly is one child. And we're doing that with Community Day School. They decided, as part of the project, we give biographical cards that contain the story of a child lost in the Holocaust. They decided that as part of their Yom HaShoah commemoration, which was yesterday morning, every student in grades 5th through 8th grade would read the name of a child. So they did that yesterday. Incredibly moving. We did that at the Keeping Tabs sculpture, which I think is an important monument in Squirrel Hill. And have all of you been there? Yeah. So, I mean, definitely building on the idea behind that sculpture that we need to remember the individuals, though it's so hard to contemplate the magnitude of that number. The important thing is to, acknowledge that each victim of the Holocaust was an individual. So last night I also spoke a little bit about Yom HaShoah, and here we are now, and this really is the Days of Remembrance. So it's so appropriate to me that this is a week of much Holocaust remembrance activity. And what's very important now to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is that when we talk to students, especially about the Holocaust, who are kids who don't even really remember September 11th, that they can understand why it's important for them to know about something that ended 70 years ago. Because it's not obvious to them. What's always been obvious to me, and probably is to many of you, just doesn't necessarily click. So we have our work cut out for us. As I mentioned, there's a second annual Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that's the United Nations Day, which is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th every year, on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. That started in 2005, so you have these 2 days that started 50 plus years apart, one in Israel and one that the world marks. And I'll just say a little bit about the vocabulary of these days. When we say Shoah, which is the Hebrew word for Holocaust, we're talking mainly about the Jewish experience in the Holocaust. When we say Holocaust, we're talking about the big picture, perpetrators, all of the different victim groups. And this distinction is important, and it came up to some extent, I would say, with the building of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, where I did work, and it was actually my first job out of college. So it was 20 years ago, and it set me up on this trajectory, which has been really just an incredible journey. And it's why I'm so grateful to be here now, that I get to be back working with survivors, working in the community, and doing this very important memory and educational work. So in Washington, the museum was built on government land, but a lot of the money came from Jewish donors. And there was a big debate. This was during the Carter presidency, and it continued, and it opened in 1993. Last time I talked about this in Squirrel Hill, a number of people in the audience were there at the dedication of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in April of 1993, which is very exciting to me. And as a side note, I always know when I'm speaking here, there will be people in the audience who know firsthand what I'm talking about and have only really heard or read about. So when we get to the end of this, I'm happy to hear your comments, and I'm sure that you'll have things to teach me, and I look forward to learning from all of you. So the government said, you may have this land to build your museum about the Holocaust, but it has to be about all of the victim groups, and it has to be about the liberators and the veterans and the soldiers. So have all of you been to the museum in Washington? So you know what the experience is. You go up that elevator and you get to the top, and it's these enormous panels of very gruesome liberation photographs. That's the story that they tell there. So it makes sense that that's how it looks. That's where it comes from. The government said, this is a government institution and you must do these things. And it really has changed the way that we remember the Holocaust. It's had a tremendous effect. But in between 1951 and Yom HaShoah in Israel, and the opening of the Holocaust Museum in Washington in 1993, there were a lot of movements of children of survivors at the local levels. So that was happening in Pittsburgh. And there's one event, an international event, that most people point to as the beginning of all of these efforts. And I'll say that there are 80 local Holocaust educational centers around the country, like ours in Pittsburgh. So we're part of a network of many institutions that work locally. But we come before that major international event. So you had a preview of this slide. You were talking, Michael, where's Michael, about the newspapers that you would like to digitize and make searchable. I did some research for this in the collection of Jewish newspapers that's scanned and is available online, and it works exactly as you described. So I put in a search for the Holocaust Center, because everything I read said it started in 1981, and I said, well, that makes sense, but I'm not sure that's true. 1980 is the real year that the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh started. And in the photograph, which you can mostly see, is Isaiah Cooperstein, who was the first director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And when he started, we were based in Belfield Hall before Pitt bought the building. And soon after that, we stayed in Oakland, but we moved to a house that Leonard Rudolph bought for the Holocaust Center, next to the Jewish Federation's building on McKee Place. And we were back in that building again, but we went there from Belfield. But for the longest time, we were in the Robinson building at the JCC, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. There was an active library there. Survivors spent a lot of time there, so it was a place where many people interacted with Holocaust survivors in Pittsburgh. We left there and went back to the house on McKee Place, and then before I got here, we signed a lease to move to the space where we are now in Greenfield. And like I said, I know some of you have been there. We were talking about, is it Greenfield, is it Squirrel Hill? It's the Squirrel Hill Plaza in Greenfield. Is the answer to that.
Hazelwood Avenue.
We're next to the food pantry, right, on Hazelwood Avenue. And as I was saying earlier, I've embraced our location in Greenfield. It really works for us. But there are a lot of people who feel like we're too far from where we are right now, from the epicenter of activity in Squirrel Hill where people could just walk in, which would be an advantage. We have another advantage, though, and that is a parking lot. So in the nearly 40 years since the center was founded, there have been 5 directors, and I am the 5th. So I want to show you some of these historical slides that I pulled up. And these are just PDFs from the newspapers, but I thought that they were really interesting. And they also say a lot about what we continue to do. So I learned from that. I've been in the position for nearly 2 years. And I learned more from reading the Jewish Chronicle from the 1980s than I could have found out, just in my daily job. It's what historians do, after all. So I love this because it shows that Holocaust survivors are taking the state flag to Israel. And that is for that international event that I mentioned that most people point to as the beginning of Holocaust Remembrance activity. And that was the World Gathering of Holocaust survivors, which took place in Israel. And I've met some children of survivors in Pittsburgh whose parents went to the World Gathering. And this was a really important moment when survivors made a commitment to tell their stories. Before that, it was not so common that a survivor would speak to a school group or would tell anyone what they had experienced. They didn't tell their children what they had experienced. They didn't talk about it. Here, they took the responsibility to educate the world about what they went through. And their children decided to share that responsibility, to support their parents in telling their stories, and then to carry on the legacy. So that all happened then, but we were here before that. So the Holocaust Center was already doing what we do before the World Gathering, which really started this movement. This I had to pull up because it is the week of Holocaust Remembrance. And in that photograph is Earl Surloff. He's very important for the history of the Holocaust Center because he started an endowment that supported a learning seminar for students in Oakland. And it was thousands of students who went there and broke into groups, and survivors told their stories to these students. That program ceased to exist, and it had more to do with schools not being able to get the buses to go there or take the day, with the regimented core requirements and other things that schools have to do. So that program doesn't exist anymore, but we brought it back recently. I'll show you this one first. We brought it back as a virtual seminar. So using the technology that's available to us and available in schools, we live streamed a lecture from a survivor, and we did that this month as a pilot program to see if we would be able to get enough students to tune in, if schools did indeed have the technology, if there would be interest. This is Sam Gottesman, whom I think probably some of you know. He's a Squirrel Hill resident. I know Libby knows him. He came out of rehab with a broken ankle and spoke twice on April 4th to a high school audience and then to a middle school audience live at the center, and then out in, cyberspace at schools from here to Erie to Philadelphia to West Virginia. Students were tuning in and hearing his story. And I don't know if you can't make it out because it's a little bit blurry, but we had some cyber school students tuning in. And so for whatever reason, those students are not in regular schools. And there are a variety of reasons. One of them writes, "This is probably the most special moment this year so far." So we could see the comments along the stream. I mean, it was very powerful. And it was just as powerful for these students who were not in the room with Sam as they heard his story. We can use technology like that increasingly as, we're always struggling. The survivors are getting older, of course. How can we bring their stories to people and actually have them telling the stories? This is one way. We can go to them and record them and live stream it. So we'll be using this technology more and more. And it's become technology that's widely available. So we really can do it without being experts in how to use the technology. So we're very excited about that. So I skipped over something that I had here because it harkens back to, let me get this going again, the beginnings of things that we still do. And you can't see it very well, but at the top in the center, there's a photograph with Sidney Busis, Hal Waldman, and Isaiah Cooperstein, and the man who's between Hal and Isaiah, I don't know him, so he didn't jump out at me, but they're holding Bruce Carter woodcuts, which is the current exhibit we have at the Holocaust Center. So it all comes full circle. Okay. So we continue to do these marquee programs, and the people that you've seen in these photographs were the original donors that made them possible. So that's why these particular newspaper articles jumped out at me, even though there was so much material in the Jewish Chronicle. Holocaust Center was really in the press all the time in the 1980s. And at the time, Sidney Busis, who was in that last slide, was the head of the Holocaust Center's advisory board. And he endeavored to raise a large endowment for us, and he was successful. And at the time, it paid for all of our expenses. It was a full-time director and a part-time admin staff person. And we could do our 3 marquee programs on that budget. We can't anymore, but we're much bigger now. We have a larger staff. We're operating a gallery and a classroom and in our own space. So we're doing a lot more than we did then, but we're still doing the things that we did then, like our Yom HaShoah commemoration, commemoration every year for Kristallnacht in November, the Waldman International Arts and Writing Competition. We just had our award ceremony on Wednesday with 6 winners from Israel, from our partner region in Carmiel Misgav. And I told you about the arts and writing seminar that we used to do that now we've done virtually, and we feel we can be even more successful planning way ahead and signing up schools, because sky is the limit for that. We had it set up so that 50 people could log in, and that was like 50 schools. And we maxed it out, and we had to upgrade our subscription so that more people could tune in. There really was an interest in it, and it really worked very well. So that's the 1980s and now, and I want to give you a little bit of what was happening in the middle. One thing that's happened pretty consistently, but most remarkably in the late 1980s, is the recording of survivors' stories. And we have in our collection now interviews with 200 plus survivors. Many of them we only have on VHS tape. So this is another story of preservation and how we make things accessible. And it's hard. I mean, it's very hard. Technology changes so quickly. But after spending about 6 months struggling with this idea that we had wonderful testimonies that nobody could watch or listen to, I discovered that the man who was the original videographer has the original master tapes of everything. So that's really good news for us, and we'll do very much what you described with the newspapers, and we're going to have an intern who's a graduate student in public history at Duquesne come in and catalog the whole thing, and we'll get it all digitized, and people will be able to access it. And it's so important. I mentioned that we have Bruce Carter's woodcuts from our collection on display now. It's only until May 5th. It's really turned out beautifully. Bruce Carter was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I don't know if anyone in the room knew him. He was pretty well known around town. There's a recording of an interview with him from 1989 where he was asked a question that people wouldn't ask now. But he was asked the question, you're not Jewish. Do people think it's unusual that you care so much about the Holocaust? I mean, now a lot of people care about the Holocaust and are involved in institutions like ours. So they ask him that, and he says, well, the Holocaust was not Jewish history. It's human history. And I thought, that's it exactly. And he said that all those years ago. And it's exactly the message that we have now, that everybody should know about this. It should be important to everybody, not only to Jewish people, not only to people whose families were directly affected by the Holocaust. We can learn so much from it about man's inhumanity toward man. And people need to know. And we talked to some school administrators and other educators today. We were talking about how history is often taught like everything was inevitable. Holocaust was inevitable. That's how it's written into a lot of the books. And I said, well, if you teach it that way, how does anyone learn individual responsibility? If you think there's nothing I can do, it's all just going to happen that way, then we know that we're not empowering students, and we want to empower students. So while we've been recording survivor stories, we also published a book, Flares of Memory, which is vignettes written by Holocaust survivors and liberators. We recorded more interviews which were released on DVD around 2008. From Flares of Memory, we had our major innovation in Holocaust education, again before I got here, and that is the Chutzpah Superheroes of the Holocaust comic book series. And they should be over there. I thought that I brought a couple of copies, but maybe they didn't make it into the box that I brought. Too bad. Anyway, this project was greeted with a little bit of confusion and not a lot of support at first. But just in talking about how comic books make content accessible to different levels of readers and to different ages, and how much kids just really like comic books and would pick these up and read them by choice, we did it. So you see Volume 1, which came out in 2014 before I got here, and Volume 2, which just came out last year. The first one is stories of local survivors, Jewish survivors who were heroes, resistors, and partisans, including Avi Monroe's father, Moshe Baron, and his wife, who's no longer living. And then the most recent volume is about international rescuers. We're beginning work on Volume 3. We're very excited about this project. Students love it. They're very well-written stories. They capture quite a lot of information in this succinct medium. It's very exciting. It was pretty much the only thing that was going on at the center for a while, and now we're doing so many things, and I'm glad that this is a piece of our activities because I think it really works. So when I began here, I felt like there was so much potential for the Holocaust Center that we really weren't realizing. And it's still a process, and we're working on it, every day. And we're active in communities that you might not think of as the communities where the Holocaust Center would be involved, and we'll get there in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to show you some slides of what the center looks like, especially, obviously, for people who haven't been there. So this was the front, right before we opened to the public in October 2015. And I think you can't see some of it, which is just fine, because we were about to get a cutout in front of the door so that wheelchairs could get in. It is an accessible space, and we need to be. This was our opening exhibit in celebration of life, which was beautiful photographs of survivors and interviews. All of the interviews are available online on our website, and you can see the photographs. So although we no longer have it up, it really has a continuing impact, and it's been really important for making connections with other communities. When they hear these stories, they see overlaps in experience that are really amazing and kind of unpredictable. The space was designed to be very dark in the front, and then as you move toward the back, there are bright colors of paint. And that's our classroom, and it's a flexible space, so we can rearrange it. Here, this is again right when we opened, and we had our exhibit of Chutzpah, which was at the Three Rivers Arts Festival in 2014. And here we are with an enormous middle school class. I think we had 70 people. So that was our benchmark. We say we can fit 70 people, and then I have to say that was 70 people who weren't quite fully grown. So let's say 65 people, not 70 people. But it fits. And we got a bunch of people in there for the Arts and Writing Award ceremony the other night too. So I think, you can see some of the brighter color there, that green wall. This is a major event that we did in the fall. Back in October 2015, again, I went to Seton Hill for their LaFrac conference, and Father Patrick Dubois spoke. The LaFrac conference is mostly Catholic clergy. And so it made sense. Father Dubois, a French priest, was there speaking to them, and I thought, we're just in Greensburg, but we have to get this guy to Pittsburgh. Do you all know who he is? He's been on 60 Minutes a couple of times, so he is fairly well known. He's a French priest who has devoted decades of his life to discovering mass graves of Jews killed by the Nazis in the former Soviet Union. So historically speaking, this is the first phase of the genocide. This happened before the death camps were built. So the knowledge that most people have of the Holocaust pretty much begins and ends at Auschwitz, and he's saying, no, this is before that. So there's an exhibit of his work that's called Holocaust by Bullets. He travels all over the world speaking about their work, and it continues in the former Soviet Union. He's also very busy identifying genocide happening now. This is an activist, an incredibly kind person. Everyone who met him really had an experience. So he was here. We had 500 people at Carnegie Mellon to hear him. We filled the auditorium, and people were standing at the back, and students were sitting on the steps, and it was really a scene. We had involvement from all of the universities. We had great support from the Catholic community, from people in the Jewish community, from foundations. It really was a coming together, and it demonstrated what we can do. And I can't say enough about that experience. Definitely was a boost in confidence for staff members who felt like, we have some nerve trying to pull this off. But it was great. We've done some other exhibits since then. I showed you the In Celebration of Life exhibit, which was our opening exhibit before Father Dubois. Since then, there he is with a high school class from Seneca Valley. He's in all black in the center. I do have a pointer. Not like that. I'm going to stop pressing buttons before I ruin the whole thing. So Father Dubois in the center, and this is a high school class where the students had lots of extracurricular activities that they all skipped so they could hear Father Patrick Dubois. Pretty incredible. And his comment at the end was that he had never seen such a young audience and one that was so engaged. So that was really wonderful. This was the next thing that we did. It was art from Belarus. That's Lazar Ron, an artist in Minsk who survived the Holocaust in Moscow while his family remained in Minsk, and all of them were killed. Later in life, he was still an artist working for the government in the Soviet Union. In his spare time, he created lithographs that were really subversive with Yiddish language and images, which later, through some research that we did, we discovered were authors who had been killed in Stalinist purges. So we had an exhibition that was about Soviet history and about Holocaust history, and very unusual. And I see some people here who saw it, I know. the best part to me was that we had a historic map in the exhibition that came from 1935, and it had the old place names. So people whose families came from Belarus or from the Russian Pale, and the place names have changed, could come and find the place where their families came from on this old map, and that was true for me. I found the town that my great-grandfather came from that I could never find, even going through atlases at the Holocaust Memorial Museum for years. So that was incredible, and I think that was something that people really learned from and enjoyed. There's Ron when he was older with these works of art, and some of them we had in the exhibit. This is what we have right now, which is Bruce Carter I mentioned, and it will be up until May 5th. And then this is our next thing, the Butterfly Project, which I mentioned to you. And I said that we were active with communities that you wouldn't necessarily think of for a Holocaust center. We had an event during Passover, which made it really special, at the Latino Family Center, which is in Hazelwood. We worked with the mayor's office to plan it, and he assigned us to someone from the Welcoming Pittsburgh initiative, and we had families, we had about 80 people, and the mayor came. So there he is, with the butterfly that he painted. So that was really incredible, and the thing that was amazing, I struggled a little bit because I know that these kids are scared. And I thought, I'm going to go into this room and talk to them about children who died in the Holocaust, who were separated from their families, basically the things that they fear. So I had to think very hard about how do you present this without terrifying these kids. So because it was Passover, I was able to talk about Jewish history and migration, the migration of the Jewish people over centuries and centuries. And they were able to see that they were hearing a history that was separate from their experience, but that I could understand what they're going through. And it really worked. It was an incredibly moving day. Now, I didn't know when I left if the kids really got it, because it's hard to tell sometimes. But there was a lot of coverage in the newspapers and on the radio about this, and they, at WESA, interviewed some kids, and they absolutely got it. They completely understood. So that was incredible. The other community that we're working with in a couple different ways is Hazelwood, and we were talking about that, and I thought, I better mention this because there's a walking tour of Hazelwood. When is that?
Saturday.
Coming right up, a walking tour of Hazelwood. I was connected with the pastor from Hazelwood, actually through Avi Monroe, so more mention of Avi in Community Day School. Pastor Tim Smith, he actually gave the invocation at our Yom HaShoah program the other night. He is working on a memorial to the boys who were killed in street violence in Hazelwood. He presided over many of the funerals over 20 years, and he realized finally, we don't remember these kids. We don't do anything to remember them. The families leave. You know, it's an embarrassment to everyone, and we want to act like they never lived. But we need to reclaim them. Incredible project. He came to the center, and we had Sam Gottesman come, the survivor who did the virtual seminar. He came and he spoke to Tim Smith and the whole staff of the Center of Life, and some of the families who lost sons or lost, women who lost brothers, kids who lost uncles. And whoa, was that a powerful event. I mean, just a complete connection between all the people in the room and just total understanding on a human level. Tim Smith, as he left, said to Sam, "You're my brother." And Sam said, "You're my brother." And I thought, wow. We can all go home now. We've done what we need to do. So we'll do Butterfly Project in Hazelwood, not with Tim Smith, but with Officer Schifrin, whom some of you may know. He has the Hazelwood Chess Club, and now it's expanded to different parts of the city. And he has a lot of young people in Hazelwood learning how to play chess. And what a wonderful program that is. So we'll be with them too. And I just felt really strongly that this is we're on Hazelwood Avenue, this is the community right down the hill from us. Center of Life is 2 minutes door to door. That we need to know them. We need to be part of their community, because I feel like we are part of their community. And that's one of the great things about being where we are, kind of at a crossroads of different communities. We can have a real impact very close by, which is wonderful. We're also recipients this year of a grant from the Grable Foundation, which will subsidize field trips for schools that can't afford them. So we'll pay for buses, We'll pay for the cost of a substitute teacher. Right now we have a group coming from Monessen. They're the first to make use of this program, which I love. I have a grandmother from Monessen, so I have a lot of Mon Valley connections all over the place, but Monessen is one of them, and I'm so glad they're going to come, because when else are they going to learn about this? It's not something they're going to learn about there. Someone mentioned that we're going to have photographs of Teenie Harris opening May 11th. This is an idea of one of our staff people who saw that the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which is like our mothership, not formally, but we see it that way, they had an exhibit of African American liberators and soldiers. And she said, could we do that with Teenie Harris photographs and show Pittsburgh people? And I said, yes, absolutely, we can. And she said, well, we have to make a case for it. I said, no, it's completely obvious that it fits what we do. So, and she had worked with that collection when the large exhibit opened at the Carnegie Museum. So we went there, and she knew the people. We talked to the curator of the collection, and she and I gave her a little advice, picked the photographs. That opens May 11th, so it's all World War II specific, also about civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. So all about Pittsburgh. And there's some overlap with the Jewish community, with the interfaith community. I hope you'll come. I really hope you'll come. The opening event is May 11th, and it will be up all summer. If you'd like to take walking tours, we're going to do a Hill District walking tour that combines African American and Jewish histories on the Hill. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And what's that?
What is that?
That is in early July. I'll make sure that this group knows all the details, especially if this is an activity that you enjoy. And we will have a bus. It's not all walking up a hill. And we have people from, I see that Eric Leegee is coming here at some point to talk about the book that the NCJW published about, the Jewish Women's Oral History Collection as the source. Yeah, that's great. So he's part of the walking tour. He'll have the Jewish history of the Hill District part, and then we have a woman from the Hill District, from Hill House, who will do the African American part. And I'm very excited, and it's my understanding that usually Hill District tours, it's one or the other. It's unusual that a tour will talk about both histories there. So I think that's going to be very strong. And then the outcome of all of our work with butterflies is going to be an exhibit that will open in the fall. And that will be fabric art by Louise Silk and all of these ceramic butterflies, which are being painted all over town now. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm happy to have discussion and answer any questions or facilitate a discussion among audience members. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you, I drive by, can you come in, park, and just go in at any time of the weekday?
We have specific open hours, which I really want to extend. This is a goal of mine in the coming year. Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 2, we are open to the public.
Maybe Wednesday, Friday.
10 to 2. We are there most of the day. And my directive is if someone comes here and we're here and nothing else is going on, we let people in. I left some of my cards over there on the table. Please give me a call if you want to come, and I'll make sure someone can let you in. Tuesdays and Thursdays we try to reserve for school groups. We often don't have school groups. So I said, people want to come in, people should be able to come in.
If you were to be asked how many survivors are left in this region, what would you say?
I would say that we're in touch with 50, but that there are more we're not in touch with, because not everyone we consider a survivor identifies as a survivor. So we use a broad definition of a survivor, anyone whose life was affected by the rise of Nazism. So a Jewish family that left Nazi Germany in 1934, we consider them survivors. Many people who got out before do not think of themselves as survivors. Also, we're not that connected with the Russian community. And among that community, there are survivors we don't know. But we work with 50.
The walking tour that you're going to have in July, would you know what day of the week it would be?
It's a Sunday.
Oh, okay, that's good. And then you would have, like a fee for people that are going to take the bus to. Okay.
Right. That's the plan, exactly.
Okay.
There's an art exhibit at the JCC, a couple doors away of the Hill District when, I guess in the 20s and 30s, by Rochelle Blumenfeld, a well-known artist in Pittsburgh. You can just walk in. She's got about 30 paintings.
Does everyone know where that happens at the JCC? Everybody knows? Yeah, I heard that it's wonderful. I
Yeah.
missed the opening event, but I also heard that it was just packed wall to wall with people. So wonderful. Melissa Hillard does very good work there.
What did the opening of the museum in DC mean to your field? What did people learn from that has infused you and your institution?
Well, when it opened, the exhibit really changed the way that people designed exhibits about the Holocaust. I'm trying to think about how best to put it. But even Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, redid their permanent exhibition after the museum in Washington opened. They used all the latest technology. What they did that was really amazing was the gathering of artifacts from around the world. And it was still communism then. I mean, they had to do all kinds of underhanded things to get those artifacts out of certain places. If the walls could talk. But that was it. I mean, they did incredible work amassing a huge collection of artifacts. And not only that, but artifacts that they really know about. I mean, they know who wore that coat, where they were. I mean, incredible knowledge about the artifacts. So they definitely pushed the field to be sort of more ambitious in their exhibition design and more thoughtful. Saying that, I was there about a year ago, the first time in many years that I'd gone through the exhibit, and it felt dated to me because Holocaust education has changed a lot since that place opened in 1993. And part of that is that it has to, because it's a different generation now.
What percentage are non-Jews that have visited over the years? I'm sure they've tracked that to some extent.
In DC?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that, but many, many, many. I mean, everybody goes to that museum. And they also had a spike in attendance this calendar year. So we've heard from schools all over town saying, we can't get tickets to bring our school to the museum, and it hadn't been that way in years. There's been a real spike in interest in visiting that museum, which may be connected to the opening of the African American Museum that's right across the street.
The Skokie Museum is also quite remarkable, and it's I've been there twice, and it's really something if you have an opportunity to visit.
This is such an interesting point, Libby, because that museum is more cutting edge than the museum in Washington. I think
I was going to say
it's at the Chicago Museum that's in Skokie. When I lived in Chicago, it was a little resource center like what we have. But since then, they've raised millions upon millions of dollars to build this incredible museum, and they are not a federal museum, so they have more freedom to do cutting-edge and interesting things. I have not been there, but I am eager to go there. They're doing something with technology that I don't know what I think of it. I have to see it to see. But they flew a Holocaust survivor to Los Angeles and interviewed him for 50-plus hours, and they made a hologram that's interactive, so you can actually talk to this hologram. And they have that in Skokie. The price tag was unfathomable, but a lot of these more wealthy museums are thinking about how they can use technology to preserve the experience of meeting a Holocaust survivor when people can't meet a Holocaust survivor anymore. But oh, no, I'll be making a trip there soon, Libby, for sure.
Have there been any efforts to document or recognize cases of genocide in Africa and Asia?
So this is one thing that the museum in Washington has done very well. They quickly, I would say, picked up that responsibility. They work very hard not only in recognizing and documenting genocide around the world, but also in trying to prevent genocide. That's something that they do very much in Washington. It's also something that Father Patrick Dubois does now. He's been very busy documenting the genocide of the Yazidi people in Iraq. So yes, there are efforts. We are not so involved in that discussion. We're involved in it a little bit in our work with teachers who make those connections, and we want to help them do that responsibly. When I first got here, I thought we need to do what we know, which is Holocaust education, but I see increasingly how important it is that we're making those connections, because we say never again, but it's happened again. So those words are not that powerful anymore, right?
Anything else? Thank you.
That's it. Thank you all so much. And brochures and flyers over there, we would love to see you. I'll say one more thing. Sunday we have an event at Community Day School. It's our first ever Walk to Remember. We're walking around the school. We were going to walk from the center to the school, but we didn't think we could close Browns Hill. So we're going to walk around the school, and we have more than 100 people coming, and we have room for as many people as can walk around that block. So it's the flyer that's green. We would love to see you. Thank you all very much.
I have a couple of comments before we break. Yad Vashem, how many of you have been at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem? Lately or earlier?
Until 2008.
Okay. Did it have the huge museum with photography?
Yes.
Len's right. It's changed fundamentally from 20 or 30 years ago, and in the direction of what Washington did. I once read an analysis about European museums. They said that a lot of times the Europeans were satisfied with sort of symbolic representation of things, and the old Yad Vashem had a lot of that. It was very moving, but it did not have an enormous amount of photographs compared to what it has now. What I also read, and I love to go to museums, was that in the US, we have to touch things. We have to feel them, which is why Colonial Williamsburg was rebuilt and the Roman Forum was left in ruins. So along comes the Holocaust Museum in DC, and it's this fantastic success. And it is, as Lauren said, extremely graphic. And it's had its impact back to Jerusalem, where the museum there is exhausted in terms of everything that it has. I mean, it divides every country into 3 or 4 different parts, and shows the Jewish history in every one of them. So people do learn over time. Lauren didn't say this. The thing that I see when I go to the Holocaust Museum in DC is not that only that the exhibits are old, but the building is worn because they've had so many more visitors than they ever expected. And you can just see it in the escalators and everything else, because it was such a, to this country's credit, such a big deal, and it became such a thing to go to in Washington. A couple other things. We're going to try to do a Hill District talk here next year as part of our effort to look at neighboring places. It's interesting, everyone is thinking about those connections. Second thing, since we started this group, and some of you have been with us a long time, I've always placed a lot of emphasis in our talks on the institutions that make Squirrel Hill run and are important to Squirrel Hill, and we're having a whole run of them. We had Shalom, this group, and then we're having Community Day, so we're taking a look at Jewish institutions. Other times we've looked at churches. But boy, has this one become a great add-on to this community. It's wonderful to hear what you're doing. We have a tradition here. Could you help us take the chairs into the back? You don't have to leave. We can have social discussion around here. Please sign up for walking tours. Please come to our next meetings. And it's very nice to be with you this evening. Good night.